The village smelled wrong. Even months after the raid, the air carried a faint trace of smoke baked deep into wood and stone. Elias stood at the edge of what had once been the main road and did not move forward immediately. The wind moved through blackened beams like a breath through broken ribs, hollow and restless. He had told himself he came back for closure. He knew that was a lie. The cottages stood in uneven skeletons, some half-collapsed, others stripped of anything worth salvaging. The well in the square still stood intact, though the bucket rope had burned away. Grass pushed through cracks in the cobblestones as if trying to reclaim what had been taken. Elias walked slowly. His boots remembered the path, even if the buildings did not. Here had stood the bakery where his wife laughed too loudly. There, the smithy where his son once tried lifting a hammer too heavy for his arms. He did not look too long at either place. His own cottage sat near the edge of the village, closest to the fields. It had burned less fiercely than the rest, perhaps spared by shifting wind, perhaps by accident. The roof had partially collapsed, but the stone walls held. He stepped inside. The hearth was cold, but intact. The table lay overturned. Charred beams littered the floor. He knelt without thinking and picked up a small piece of pottery from the ashes, painted blue along its rim. His wife had liked blue. He set it down carefully. The raid had come at dawn months ago. Horns in the distance. Then shouting. Then fire. Orcs. He had been away with the border patrol at the time. By the time he returned, smoke was all that remained. He had buried what he could find. Some graves were empty. He told himself that was mercy. A sudden sound pulled him from memory. A faint scrape. Wood against stone. Elias froze. The village had been abandoned since the attack. Scavengers came sometimes, desperate travelers, stray dogs, even crows bold enough to nest in broken rafters. But this sound was inside. He rose slowly, hand instinctively reaching for the short blade at his belt. Another scrape. From the barn behind the cottage. The barn doors hung crooked on broken hinges. Half the roof had caved in. Elias approached without hurry but without hesitation. "Come out," he said quietly. Silence. Then a soft shift of weight. He pushed the barn door inward. The smell hit him first, damp straw and something else. Fear. A small shape moved in the far corner behind a collapsed support beam. Elias stepped inside, boots crunching over splintered wood. "I won't ask twice," he said, voice steady. The shape flinched, and then he saw her. Green skin, too thin, dark hair tangled and cut unevenly as if hacked off in haste. An orc girl. She could not have been more than 10. She held a broken piece of wood like a weapon, though her hands trembled too much to make it convincing. Her eyes, wide, amber, and rimmed with exhaustion, never left his face. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The world narrowed to that single barn. His village burned because of her kind. His family gone because of her kind. And here one stood before him, not armored, not shouting, not wielding fire. Starving, bruised, terrified. Her lip was split. One arm bore a crude bandage stained through. She looked as though she had been hiding for days, maybe weeks. "Who are you?" Elias asked quietly. She did not answer. Her grip tightened on the broken plank. "Your clan?" he pressed. "Nothing." He took one step forward. She recoiled instantly, raising the wood defensively. "Don't," he said sharply. She froze at the tone. Not defiance, not hatred, just raw fear. And that confused him more than anything. He had imagined facing an orc again 100 times since the raid. In those imaginings, there had always been rage. There had always been justice. There had never been a child shaking in the ruins of his barn. He lowered his hand from his blade slowly. She watched every movement. "You're alone?" he asked. Her jaw clenched. Then, barely audible, "Yes." The word was broken, accented, but clear. Elias stared at her. He should call the border guards. He should drag her to the road and let someone else decide her fate. He should feel satisfaction. Instead, he felt something far more dangerous. Recognition. She was alone in a burned village. So was he. Outside, Wind moved through the broken beams again. Inside the barn, the silence stretched thin. He looked at the barn door, then back at her. "You can't stay here," he said. Her fingers tightened on the plank. Fear deepened in her eyes. He exhaled slowly. "Put that down," he said. She hesitated, but she did not attack. And that hesitation, that fragile thread of restraint, changed everything. Elias did not move for several long seconds after she lowered the broken plank. It fell from her trembling hands with a dull thud against the barn floor. She did not step toward him. She did not speak again. She simply stood there, thin shoulders tight, eyes wide, waiting for whatever punishment followed surrender. He had seen that look before. On prisoners. On villagers when patrols passed through tense border towns. He had never expected to see it directed at him. "Come out from there," he said, keeping his voice level. She hesitated, then slowly shifted around the collapsed beam. Up close, she looked worse than he first thought. Dirt clung to her skin in streaks. One cheek was swollen. The crude bandage around her arm had been wrapped with torn cloth that was no longer clean. "How long have you been here?" he asked. She swallowed. 3, maybe 4 sons, she said in broken human speech. Days. She had been hiding in the ruins of a village that would kill her on sight. "Your clan?" he asked again. Her gaze dropped to the floor. "Gone." He believed her. Raids scattered as often as they conquered. Not every orc marched under a single banner. Border wars were chaotic. Retreats turned into abandonments. Children were lost in both directions. He rubbed a hand over his face. He should walk away. He should report her. He imagined bringing her to the nearest garrison. The guards would not ask questions beyond necessary ones. She would be classified, transferred, possibly imprisoned, possibly worse. She swayed slightly where she stood. "Sit," he said without thinking. She blinked at him, confused. "Sit," he repeated, gesturing toward a half-broken crate. She obeyed immediately. That obedience unsettled him. He stepped closer carefully, watching for any sudden movement. None came. She flinched when he crouched, but she did not pull away. He reached for her bandaged arm. She hissed softly in warning. "I'm not hurting you," he muttered. He unwrapped the cloth gently. The cut beneath was shallow but infected. Whoever had wrapped it had done so in haste. "Idiot," he muttered, not at her, but at the situation. She stiffened at the tone anyway. "I meant the wound," he clarified roughly. She stared at him, unsure whether to believe that. He stood and walked toward the cottage without another word. He left the barn door open. He half expected her to run. She didn't. When he returned with a small tin of salve and clean cloth strips, she had not moved from the crate. He knelt again and cleaned the wound carefully. She flinched but did not resist. "You have a name?" he asked. She hesitated. "Lyra." The name felt too soft for the memory of screaming and fire. "Lyra," he repeated. She nodded faintly. "Elias," he said, gesturing toward himself. She studied his face as if memorizing it. He finished wrapping her arm and leaned back on his heels. Silence filled the barn again. He looked at the broken beams around them, at the place where his son used to climb onto hay bales and pretend to be a knight. And now an orc child sat in that same corner. "You can't stay in the barn," he said finally. Her body went rigid again. "You'll freeze tonight." Her breathing quickened. "I'm not turning you in," he added quickly, the words surprising even him. She stared at him. "You not?" she asked carefully. He shook his head once. "Not tonight." The relief that flooded her face was immediate and devastating. He stood slowly and extended a hand. She looked at it as if it might disappear. After a long moment, she reached out. Her fingers were cold, small. He helped her stand. He should have hated her. He should have seen only the green of her skin and the memory of smoke. Instead, as he led her toward the cottage, he saw something else. A child who did not understand why the world had burned. And he was not sure anymore that he understood it either. The cottage felt smaller with her inside it. Elias had spent months repairing just enough of the structure to sleep beneath a solid roof. He had patched gaps in the walls with scavenged boards, rebuilt the hearth, and cleared one corner for a narrow cot. The rest remained sparse: a table, 2 chairs, a storage chest, and silence. Now that silence had changed, Lyra stood just inside the doorway, eyes scanning every surface as if mapping escape routes. She did not step further until Elias closed the door behind them. Even then, she remained near it, back almost touching the wood. "You can sit," he said, gesturing toward the second chair. She did not move. He exhaled slowly and sat first, making the motion obvious. Only then did she edge toward the chair and lower herself into it carefully, as though it might collapse beneath her weight. He poured water from a small jug into a wooden cup and slid it across the table toward her. She stared at it. "It's just water," he muttered. She picked it up with both hands and drank quickly, too quickly. She coughed, lowering it halfway, then forced herself to sip more slowly. He watched her without speaking. Her wrists were thin, her cheekbones too sharp. Whatever clan she had belonged to, she had not been well supplied before whatever disaster had scattered them. Or perhaps she had been running longer than she admitted. He stood and moved toward the small storage chest near the hearth. From it, he pulled a wrapped loaf and a strip of dried meat, the last of what he had intended to stretch for himself through the week. He set it on the table. She did not reach for it. "Eat," he said. Her eyes flicked to his face, then to the food, then back again. He realized suddenly what she was waiting for. Permission. Or trap. "It's not poisoned," he said flatly. She did not seem reassured. He tore off a piece of the bread himself and ate it deliberately. Then he pushed the rest toward her. Only then did she move. She picked up the bread first, sniffed it cautiously, then bit into it with quick, sharp movements, as if someone might take it away. She ate in silence, finishing the bread before touching the meat. He felt something tighten in his chest as he watched her. His son had eaten like that once, after a long day in the fields, stuffing bread into his mouth with no patience for manners. He forced the thought away. "You can stay tonight," he said after a while. She froze mid-bite. "Just tonight," he added quickly, though he wasn't sure why he said it. She nodded rapidly. "I go tomorrow," she said in broken words. "Go where?" Her gaze dropped again. Silence. He rubbed his temples slowly. If the village rebuilt in full and someone found her here, there would be no negotiation. She would be taken. He might be questioned for harboring her. The border patrols still passed through occasionally. If one of them recognized him, and they would, questions would follow. He stood abruptly and walked to the small window, peering out at the empty path beyond the cottage. No one had returned yet. The village remained a skeleton. But that would not last forever. "You can't be seen," he said finally. She tilted her head slightly, not understanding. "People," he said, gesturing outward. "If they see you, it's bad." She nodded slowly. "Bad," she repeated. He turned back toward her. "I should report you," he said. She stiffened again, hands gripping the edge of the table. "I won't," he added after a beat. Her eyes searched his face carefully. "Why?" she asked. The question caught him off guard. Why? He could list a dozen reasons not to keep her. War, memory, loss, hatred. He had buried his family because of an orc raid. And yet, "You're a child," he said at last. She stared at him as if that answer made no sense. Maybe in her world, it didn't. He moved toward the small cot in the corner and dragged it slightly closer to the hearth. "You sleep there," he said. She shook her head immediately. "Not bed," she said. "Floor. You're not sleeping on the floor." She hesitated. "Trap?" she asked quietly. The word hit harder than he expected. "No," he said firmly. "No trap." He stepped back from the cot, leaving space between them. After a long moment, she stood slowly and approached it. She touched the edge cautiously, then sat. The tension in her shoulders remained, but she did not flee. Elias sat back down in his own chair and stared at the dying embers in the hearth. He had made the decision, not just for the night. The moment he brought her inside, it had stopped being temporary. If anyone found out, he would have to defend it. And he wasn't sure he knew how. Across the room, Lyra lay stiffly on the cot, eyes open and fixed on the ceiling. Neither of them slept easily. But for the first time since the raid, the cottage was not empty. And that made the decision far more dangerous than he had allowed himself to admit. Morning came quietly. Elias woke to the faint crackle of the hearth and the unfamiliar awareness that he was not alone. For a brief, disoriented second, he reached for the short blade beneath his pillow. Then he saw her. Lyra was already awake, sitting upright on the cot with her knees drawn to her chest. She had not removed her boots. She had not used the blanket properly. She simply sat there, watching the room as if it might shift without warning. "You didn't sleep," he said. She shrugged faintly. He stood and moved toward the hearth, adding another piece of wood to the coals. The small space warmed slowly. He poured water into the kettle and set it to heat. "You're not a prisoner," he said after a moment. She looked at him uncertainly. "You don't have to sit like that." She glanced toward the door instinctively. He noticed. I'm not locking it, he added. She hesitated before lowering her legs from the cot and standing slowly. The silence between them felt heavier in daylight. At night, fear had justified it. Now, it simply lingered, awkward and fragile. He broke stale bread into 2 pieces and handed one to her again. This time, she did not wait for him to eat first. But she still ate quickly. Slow down, he muttered. She blinked. Slow, he repeated, demonstrating with exaggerated bites. She mimicked him clumsily, chewing more carefully. He watched her for a long moment. How old are you? He asked. She frowned slightly, searching for the word. 10, maybe, she said uncertainly. Maybe. She lifted one shoulder. In clan, age not count same. He nodded faintly. War did that to numbers. He poured hot water into 2 cups and handed one to her. She flinched at the steam, then carefully took it. He noticed the way her eyes tracked every movement he made. Not just cautious, conditioned. You don't have to expect a hit, he said bluntly. Her fingers tightened around the cup. I don't hit, he added. She stared at him, then nodded once, but her shoulders did not relax. The cut on her arm looked better in daylight, though still angry and red. He re-wrapped it gently, and this time she did not hiss when he touched it. Outside, wind brushed through broken beams in the distant cottages. He stiffened. Stay inside, he said immediately. She froze again. Why? Because if anyone sees you. Bad, she finished quietly. Yes. He stepped outside alone to scan the road. No one yet. But that would change. Word would spread eventually that he had returned to the village permanently. Traders would pass. Border patrols would resume their circuits more frequently as rebuilding began. And if anyone saw green skin through the window, he returned inside quickly. You need to stay out of sight, he said. She nodded. I hide good, she said softly. The words twisted something in his chest. He moved toward the table and sat heavily. He had imagined rebuilding alone, repairing fences, planting fields, living in quiet with ghosts. Now there was a child sitting across from him who looked at the world as if it might strike at any moment. You're not my enemy, he said suddenly. The words surprised even him. She blinked. Enemy. He gestured vaguely between them. War. Her expression shifted slightly, not understanding, but something close. I not raid, she said quietly. I know. My mother, say hide, she added, voice lowering. He met her gaze. She's alive. Lyra shook her head slowly. No. Silence fell again. Grief did not require translation. He looked down at his hands. You lost family, she said hesitantly. He stiffened. Yes. Orcs, she asked. Yes. She lowered her eyes. I not them, she whispered. The simplicity of it struck harder than accusation would have. He leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. I know, he said. And he did. That was the problem. Hatred would have been easier, clearer. Instead, he saw bruises and fear in a child who did not understand why her world had burned any more than he did. The cottage felt less hostile now. Still tense. Still fragile. But something had shifted. She finished her bread more slowly this time. He noticed. Good, he muttered. She looked up. Good, she asked. You're learning. A faint, almost imperceptible expression touched her face. Not quite a smile, but close. Outside, the wind carried the distant sound of hammering from the far end of the village. Someone else had returned. The world was beginning to move again, which meant their fragile arrangement had an expiration date. He looked at her across the table. Whatever happens, he said quietly, you don't run without telling me. She hesitated, then nodded. Okay. Hunger had brought her into his barn. Silence had kept her in his house. But now something else was growing in that small cottage. Something more dangerous than resentment. Understanding. The fever came at night. Elias had just begun drifting into uneasy sleep when he heard the sound, a soft, strained whimper from the other side of the room. It was small enough that he might have mistaken it for wind through the broken shutters if he hadn't grown used to listening for her breathing. He sat up immediately. Lyra was curled tightly on the cot, blanket twisted around her legs, face flushed unnaturally dark beneath her green skin. Her bandaged arm trembled where it lay across her chest. He crossed the room in 3 strides. Lyra, he said quietly. Her eyes did not open. He pressed the back of his hand to her forehead. Too hot. Damn it, he muttered. He fetched water, soaking a cloth and pressing it gently to her brow. She flinched even in unconsciousness, teeth clenched tight. Her breathing came unevenly. Infection, he said under his breath. He should have known it might turn worse. She was malnourished, exhausted, wounded, and terrified most of the time. The body could only endure so much. He moved quickly but carefully, reopening the bandage and cleaning the wound again. The skin was swollen and angry, but not beyond saving. "Stay with me," he murmured without thinking. She stirred faintly. Her lips moved. He leaned closer to hear. "Ma, R.A.," she whispered weakly. It wasn't a word he recognized, but he knew the tone. Mother. The sound of it hit him harder than any blade ever had. His own son had called out the same way once, feverish from a winter sickness that had nearly taken him years ago. Elias had sat by that bedside too, counting breaths and praying to gods he barely believed in. He pressed the cloth to her forehead again. "You're not alone," he said quietly. She did not understand the words, but perhaps she understood the presence. Hours passed. The fire burned low, then was rebuilt. He did not sleep. When her fever spiked, she thrashed weakly, whispering in Orcish too fast for him to follow. He caught only fragments. "Run. Hide. Don't." Her fingers clutched blindly at the blanket until they caught his sleeve. She held on, tightly. He could have pulled away. He didn't. Instead, he sat on the edge of the cot and let her grip anchor him there. "You're safe," he said again, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. Outside, wind brushed the broken roofs of the village. Inside, the cottage felt smaller than ever, but also fuller. As the night deepened, her fever finally began to break. Sweat beaded along her temple. Her breathing evened. Her grip loosened slightly, but did not release him entirely. He stayed until dawn. When light filtered faintly through the window, her eyes opened slowly. Disoriented, then focused. On him. She blinked, confused to find him sitting beside her. "You here?" she murmured. "Yes." She looked down at her own hand gripping his sleeve and immediately withdrew it, embarrassment flashing across her face. "Sorry," she whispered. "It's fine," he said. She studied his face carefully, as if confirming something important. "You not leave," she said. "No." A long silence stretched between them. Then, quietly, "Thank you." The words were halting, uneven, but they were clear. It was the first time she had said anything that was not fear or survival. It was the first time she had chosen to speak to him instead of at him. He felt something shift inside his chest, something he had been keeping locked since the raid. "Get some rest," he said gruffly, standing. She nodded, but her gaze followed him as he moved toward the hearth. When he turned back, she was still watching. Not with fear this time, with something else. Recognition. Trust did not arrive loudly. It came in small moments. A hand not pulled away. A fever tended. A word spoken without shaking. He had expected resentment to grow in this house. Instead, something far more fragile had begun to take root. And he realized, with quiet certainty, if anyone tried to take her now, he would not hesitate to stand in their way. The village did not remain empty forever. By the end of the week, smoke began rising from 2 other chimneys along the main road. Hammering echoed in the mornings as returning families patched roofs and cleared debris. The quiet grief that had hung over the ruins was slowly being replaced by cautious rebuilding. And with rebuilding came eyes. Elias adjusted quickly. Lyra did not leave the cottage during daylight. He showed her the narrow crawl space beneath the floorboards where he had once stored winter potatoes. It was dry, hidden, and accessible from a loose plank near the hearth. "You go there if someone knocks," he instructed. She nodded seriously. "I hide good," she repeated. He didn't like how natural that sounded. One afternoon, as Elias repaired a broken fence near the road, he noticed Tomas Grell watching him from across the field. Tomas had returned 3 days earlier with his wife and 2 small children. He had not yet spoken more than a passing greeting. Now he walked closer. "You settling back in?" Tomas asked, leaning on the fence post. "Trying," Elias replied without looking up. Tomas studied the cottage behind him. "You've got more smoke lately," he observed casually. Elias kept his hammer steady. "Cold nights. Didn't think you kept such a large fire for just yourself." Elias straightened slowly. "Since when do you count my firewood?" Tomas raised both hands slightly. "Just saying. Folks notice things. Folks should mind their own." Tomas hesitated. "You hear anything strange at night?" The question was too specific. Elias felt tension tighten in his spine. "Wind," he said flatly. "Old beams." Tomas nodded slowly, but his eyes lingered on the cottage a moment longer before he turned away. Elias did not move until Tomas disappeared down the road. He returned inside immediately. Lyra was sitting near the hearth, practicing forming letters he had scratched into a scrap of wood with charcoal. She looked up quickly when he entered. "Someone come?" she asked. "Yes." She stiffened instantly. "No one saw you," he added. Her shoulders eased slightly, but not fully. He knelt beside her and looked at the uneven letters she had copied. Her human writing was improving. Slowly. "You're getting better," he said. She gave a small nod. Later that evening, as he carried water from the well, he felt it again, that sense of being watched. Old Merrick stood near the bakery ruins, arms crossed. "You planning to farm again?" Merrick called out. "Yes." "Alone?" Elias paused. "Yes." Marek's eyes narrowed slightly. "You sure about that?" Elias met his gaze steadily. "Say what you're thinking." Merrick hesitated. "Some of us lost people too," he said finally. "We don't need more trouble." "Neither do I." Merrick studied him for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. "Just make sure trouble doesn't come knocking at our doors again." He walked away without another word. Elias stood there longer than necessary, water bucket hanging heavy in his hand. Inside the cottage, Lyra waited near the door. "You angry?" she asked quietly. He set the bucket down. "No. You lie bad," she said gently. Despite himself, he almost smiled. "I'm careful," he corrected. She looked toward the window. "They think." "I hear." "Not yet. But soon." He didn't answer immediately. She wasn't wrong. Whispers spread easily in villages this small. Extra smoke. Extra water drawn from the well. Footprints too light to be his. He could feel suspicion beginning to coil around the edges of his solitude. "You don't run," he said firmly. Her jaw tightened. "I don't. If someone asks, you stay hidden." She nodded. "And if they find you?" she asked. The question settled heavily between them. He looked at her for a long moment. "Then they answer to me." Her eyes widened slightly at that. "You fight?" she asked softly. "If I have to." She studied him carefully. "You not hate me," she said. It wasn't a question. He exhaled slowly. "No." "Why?" He stepped closer, resting a hand lightly on the table. "Because hating you won't bring them back." She absorbed that quietly. Outside, another hammer struck wood in the distance. The village was coming back to life. And life meant scrutiny. Elias understood something clearly now. Hiding her would not be enough. Soon, he would have to defend her. Not in whispers, but openly. And that choice was coming faster than he'd hoped. It happened sooner than Elias expected. The knock came just after midday, firm, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. Lyra froze instantly, eyes wide. He didn't need to say anything. She was already moving toward the loose plank near the hearth. "Quiet," he whispered. She nodded and slipped beneath the floorboards, pulling the plank back into place with careful precision. From the outside, it looked undisturbed. The knock came again. Elias wiped his hands on a cloth and opened the door. Tomas stood there, Merrick beside him, and behind them, 3 others. Not armed, but not casual either. "We need to talk," Merrick said. Elias stepped aside without inviting them in. "Talk then." Tomas glanced past him into the cottage. "You've been using more water than one man needs. Rebuilding takes water. So does washing smaller clothes," Tomas said quietly. The words hung heavy. Elias felt something inside him harden. "Say it clearly," he said. Merrick crossed his arms. "There are footprints," he said. "Light ones. Near your back door." Elias didn't respond. "And children have sharper eyes than we do," Tomas added. "My boy saw green through your window yesterday." Silence fell between them. The moment of hiding had ended. Elias stepped fully into the doorway, blocking their view inside. "She's a child," he said. The words changed the air. Marek's jaw tightened. "So it's true." "Yes. You're harboring an orc." "I'm sheltering a child." Tomas rubbed a hand over his face. "You know what that means." "Yes. If patrols find out." "They won't," Elias cut in. "That's not the point," Merrick snapped. "We buried our dead because of them." "And she buried hers," Elias shot back. The bluntness startled even him. Merrick stared at him. "She's not a raider," Elias continued. "She's 10. That doesn't change what she is," one of the other men muttered. Elias' voice dropped lower. "It changes everything." Silence. Wind brushed across the road behind them. Tomas spoke more quietly now. "Does she have family?" "No." Marek's expression faltered slightly. "She from the raid?" he asked. "I don't know," Elias admitted. "She was hiding in my barn. You should have turned her in." Yes, Elias said. I should have. The honesty unsettled them. But I didn't, he continued. And I won't. Merrick studied him for a long moment. You're asking us to accept an orc under our roofs. No, Elias replied. I'm asking you to leave her under mine. The group fell quiet. From beneath the floorboards, there was no sound. But Elias could feel her listening. Tomas shifted uncomfortably. If word spreads. It won't, Elias said firmly. That's not how villages work, Merrick muttered. Elias stepped fully out of the doorway, closing the door behind him. She doesn't leave the house, he said. She doesn't cause trouble. She eats what I give her. She hides when told. Merrick looked at him carefully. And when she grows? Elias didn't hesitate. Then she'll grow here. A long pause followed. The others exchanged uneasy glances. She could be dangerous, one man insisted. So could we, Elias replied. We burned their villages too. That statement hit harder than he intended. Marek's eyes narrowed. Careful. I am careful, Elias said quietly. Careful enough not to turn a child into something she doesn't have to become. Tomas exhaled slowly. My boy saw her, he said. He said she looked scared. She is, Elias replied. Another silence. Then Merrick sighed heavily. If patrols come asking, we don't lie for you, he said. I won't ask you to. And if she steps out of line, she won't. Merrick held his gaze. For your sake, he said finally. The group dispersed slowly, tension lingering in their wake. Elias waited until they were out of sight before opening the door again. He lifted the loose plank carefully. Lyra's eyes stared up at him, wide, waiting. They know, she whispered. Yes. She climbed out slowly. Now what? She asked. He looked at her for a long moment. Now, he said, we stop hiding. Fear flickered across her face. They hate me, she said quietly. Some do, he admitted. But not you, she asked. He shook his head once. No. Her shoulders eased slightly. Outside, the village continued rebuilding. But now the truth stood in the open. No more shadows. No more pretending. He had defended her. Publicly. And there was no turning back. Whatever came next, he would face it beside her. The council called for him at sunset. Not formally. Harrow's Inn had never been large enough for elaborate summons. But word traveled quickly. At the well, Tomas had said quietly that afternoon. After supper, Elias knew what it meant. Lyra sat at the small table when he told her. They want you gone, she said immediately. They want answers, he corrected. She didn't look convinced. You stay here, he said. She stood abruptly. No. Yes. Her jaw tightened. I not hide again. He stepped closer. This isn't hiding. This is protection. For who? She asked softly. The question struck deeper than he expected. For both of us, he said finally. She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded. Okay. When Elias reached the well, nearly half the rebuilt village stood there. Not shouting, not armed, but serious. Merrick stood at the center, leaning on his cane. Tomas beside him. The miller. The baker's widow. Others who had lost something in the raid. Elias stepped into the circle without hesitation. You all know why I'm here, he said. Merrick nodded. You've put us in a position, he replied. I gave a child shelter. You gave the border patrol a reason to question us, someone called out. She's 10, Elias said sharply. She barely speaks our language. That doesn't change her blood, another voice muttered. Elias scanned the faces around him. How many of you lost family, he asked. Hands rose slowly. How many of you would have wanted your child hunted for revenge? Silence followed. This isn't revenge, Merrick said carefully. It's safety. From what? Elias demanded. From a girl who's afraid of her own shadow? The baker's widow stepped forward then. I saw her, she said quietly. Several heads turned. She came to the window when she thought no one was looking. She didn't look like a soldier. She won't stay small forever, another man said. Elias' voice hardened. Then we teach her different. Murmurs spread through the group. You're asking us to trust an orc, someone said. No, Elias replied. I'm asking you to trust me. That landed heavier. Merrick studied him. You're willing to stake your place here on that? Yes. And if patrols discover her? I take responsibility. Alone? Tomas asked. Yes. A long silence stretched across the square. The weight of it pressed against his ribs. Merrick finally sighed. You always were stubborn, he muttered. That's not an answer, Elias said. The baker's widow spoke again. My daughter died in that raid, she said quietly. And I've hated every green face I've seen since. The circle tightened slightly. But when I saw that girl, she continued, I saw something else. What? Someone asked. Fear. The word moved through the crowd like wind through dry grass. Merrick looked down at the cobblestones. If we let her stay, he said slowly, we're making a statement. Yes, Elias said. That we won't answer every wound with another, the widow finished. Silence. Then Tomas spoke. If patrols come, we say she's under village protection. Several heads snapped toward him. You'd risk that? Someone asked. Tomas shrugged faintly. We rebuilt this place together. Maybe we decide what it stands for. The murmurs shifted. Less sharp. More uncertain. Merrick exhaled slowly. She stays, he said at last. Not loudly, but clearly. On one condition, he added. Elias waited. She works, Merrick said. Learns our ways. Follows our rules. She will, Elias said immediately. And if she causes harm? She won't. Merrick's eyes met his. That's not what I asked. Elias hesitated only a fraction. If she does, he said quietly, you come to me first. Merrick nodded once. The circle loosened slowly. Not full acceptance. Not celebration. But no exile. When Elias returned to the cottage, Lyra stood near the door waiting. Well, she asked. He looked at her for a long moment. You're staying, he said. Her shoulders sagged with relief. But, he added, you're not hiding anymore. Fear flickered again. They don't hate me. Some do, he said honestly. But some don't. She studied his face carefully. And you? He stepped closer and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. I chose, he said simply. Outside, the village lights burned a little longer that night. The price of mercy had been paid. Not in blood, but in decision. And for the first time since the raid, Harrow's Inn felt less like a graveyard and more like a beginning. Spring softened the edges of the village. Where ash had once settled thick in the air, now green shoots pushed stubbornly through soil turned by patient hands. Roofs stood straighter. Smoke rose steady and calm from chimneys. The sound of hammering gave way to the quieter rhythm of planting and tending. And Lyra no longer hid when daylight touched the windows. The first time she stepped into the open road beside Elias, the village went quiet. Not hostile, not welcoming, just watchful. She stood half a step behind him at first, shoulders tense, eyes lowered. Elias kept his pace steady, not rushing, not slowing. Tomas' youngest daughter waved hesitantly from across the road. Lyra blinked in surprise. She did not wave back, but she did not retreat either. Work came next. Merrick insisted on it. If she stays, she contributes, he had said. So Elias brought her to the fields. He showed her how to mend fences properly, not just patch them. How to sort seed grain. How to cut wood without dulling the blade. At first, she worked with the urgency of someone proving she deserved breath. You don't have to race the sun, he muttered once when she nearly dropped a bundle of firewood twice her size. She straightened stubbornly. I'm strong, she said. I can see that. It was true. For someone so thin, she carried more than he expected. Her movements were precise, controlled. Orc strength, tempered by caution. The first time she spoke back to him without fear was over a hoe. You hold wrong, she said quietly. He raised an eyebrow. Excuse me. She stepped closer, adjusting his grip with careful fingers. In clan, we do like this. Less tire. He tested the angle. It worked. He glanced at her. Don't get used to correcting me. A faint smile flickered across her face. I won't, she replied. The villagers watched these moments. They noticed when she carried water for the widow without being asked. When she returned a dropped sack of grain instead of pocketing it. When she stopped to help Tomas' boy untangle a snare. Suspicion did not vanish overnight, but it thinned. Children adjusted faster than adults. Within weeks, Tomas' daughter began leaving small flowers near the cottage door. Lyra never mentioned them, but she kept them in a jar near the hearth. Language came slowly. She stumbled over long words and sometimes mixed orc phrases into human sentences. Elias corrected her with gruff patience. She corrected him when he mispronounced her clan words in return. You say wrong, she insisted once. I say fine. You say like goat choking. He stared at her. She waited. He huffed a reluctant laugh. That night, sitting by the hearth, he realized something quietly profound. The cottage no longer felt like borrowed space. It felt lived in. She had carved small shapes into a scrap of wood near the window. Not runes, not weapons. Just patterns. Leaves. Curves. He had not asked her to stop. One evening, As they walked back from the fields, Merrick approached them again. She works hard, the old man admitted. Yes. She listens. Yes. Merrick studied Lyra directly this time. You learning our ways? She met his gaze steadily. Yes. And you remember yours? She hesitated. Yes. Merrick nodded once. Good. Don't forget either. He walked away. Lyra looked up at Elias. Is that good? Yes, he said quietly. That's good. Later that night, as rain tapped softly against the roof, Lyra lingered by the hearth instead of going straight to the cot. Elias, she said carefully. Yes. In my clan, if elder taken child not blood, we call them something. He looked at her. What? She swallowed slightly. Viren. What does it mean? She held his gaze. Homekeeper. He felt something shift in his chest. Viren, she repeated softly. He didn't answer immediately, but he didn't look away either. Outside, the village lights dimmed one by one. Inside, the cottage held warmth, not just from fire, but from something far rarer. She had not replaced what he lost. Nothing could, but she had filled the silence. And in that quiet space between grief and tomorrow, a new kind of family had taken root. Years did not erase the past, but they softened its edges. The village no longer whispered when Lyra walked through it. Children who once stared now worked beside her in the fields. She had grown taller, nearly Elias' height now, her shoulders strong from labor, her speech steady and clear. The sharp fear that once lived behind her eyes had faded into something quieter. Confidence. She still carved small patterns into wood during long evenings, but now she carved tools too. Fence pegs, handles, repair braces. Her hands were steady, skilled, and when she laughed, rare but real, it no longer sounded cautious. Elias had aged more quickly. The lines around his eyes had deepened. His hands, once unshakable, sometimes trembled after long days in the cold. He did not complain about it. Lyra noticed anyway. One late autumn afternoon, horns sounded at the edge of the village. Not alarm, but patrol. Human soldiers rode in from the border road, armor polished, cloaks marked with the king's insignia. The village stiffened. Patrol still came, though less often than before. This one rode with purpose. Their captain dismounted near the well and scanned the gathering villagers. We're tracking movement beyond the ridge, he announced. Orc activity. A ripple of tension moved through the square. Elias stepped forward calmly. What kind of activity, he asked. Unconfirmed, the captain replied. But we have reports of a small clan crossing into outer farmland. Murmurs sharpened. Eyes shifted, some toward Lyra without meaning to. The captain noticed. His gaze landed on her and did not immediately move away. You, he said. Lyra held his stare. Yes. You're orc. Yes. You have information? No. The captain stepped closer. We need to question you. Elias moved between them without hesitation. She's a villager. She's an orc, the captain corrected. She's under our protection, Marek's voice called from behind. Others stepped forward too. Not aggressively, but firmly. The captain's eyes narrowed slightly. You're harboring one of them openly now. She works our fields, Tomas said. Pays our taxes. That's not how blood works, one soldier muttered. Lyra stepped around Elias before he could stop her. I answer, she said clearly. Elias grabbed her arm lightly. You don't have to. She looked at him. Yes, I do. The captain studied her carefully. Are you in contact with any clan beyond the ridge? No. Would you warn them if you were? No. Why not? She did not hesitate. Because this is my home. The words landed heavier than steel. The captain's gaze flicked toward Elias. You raised her, he said. Yes. After what happened here. Yes. The captain studied the village, the rebuilt homes, the shared fields, the people standing shoulder to shoulder. If fighting breaks out again, he said carefully, where do her loyalties lie? Silence settled. Lyra answered before Elias could. With the people who kept me alive. The captain held her gaze for a long moment. And if those beyond the ridge are your blood? She didn't look away. Blood did not feed me. A murmur moved through the villagers. The captain straightened slowly. You understand, he said. If we find evidence otherwise. You won't, Merrick cut in. The captain's jaw tightened, but he did not argue further. We'll patrol the outer fields, he said finally. If we need assistance, we expect cooperation. You'll have it, Elias replied. The soldiers mounted again and rode toward the ridge. The square remained silent until they were out of sight. Then Tomas exhaled. That could have gone worse. Yes, Elias agreed quietly. Lyra turned toward him. You shouldn't stand in front of me like that, she said. He raised an eyebrow. And let you handle it alone? I'm not 10 anymore. He looked at her, really looked at her. No longer the trembling child in his barn. Strong. Steady. Sure. No, he said softly. You're not. That evening, as they sat by the hearth, Lyra adjusted the firewood carefully. You once say something, she said. What? You say hating me won't bring them back. He nodded faintly. She looked at him across the firelight. Giving me home didn't bring them back either. No, he said. But it built something else. He felt his throat tighten slightly. Yes. Outside, the village stood quiet beneath the stars. Years ago, he had stood in ashes and believed hatred would be the only thing left to him. Instead, he had chosen something harder. And now, when soldiers rode in and suspicion rose again, she did not hide. She stood, not as an orc, not as a burden, but as his daughter. And when the world asked where her loyalty lay, she answered without fear, not with blood, but with home.